Machinima, we shared some time at in the gaming space. R.I.P. Pour out a little.
I don't want to get the Verizon
electrical fire.
R.I.P. Masters of Craft.
Exactly. Good night, Verizon.
Good night.
We burned down Verizon.
We burned down. Video gaming was considered fringe culture. When we were building Machinima early, traditional entertainment people were sort of like, that seems stupid. Venture capitalists were like, wait, what games do you make? We don't make any games. So you make videos about kids playing video games?
And other people's IP? Like how is that even monetizable?
So it all seemed weird, fringe, and super niche. And we'd have to remind the venture capital community and the entertainment community that the games business is 3 times bigger than the movie business.
Please stop talking as we begin the show. Hi, Sanjay Sharma. How are you?
Chris Denson, what is going on?
Sanjay, a.k.a. Big Sharm, a.k.a. I had another whole Charmin thing I was about to do. Anyway, before we...
I got a lot of don't squeeze the Charmin growing up.
I'm sorry.
You know, it's okay.
Before we get too ridiculous. Greetings, everybody, and welcome to another installment of Innovation Crush presents Masters of Craft. Do you feel masterful today?
It doesn't roll off the tongue. Innovation Crush, Masters of Craft.
Yeah, but that's too many words.
I see.
Why are they joined together? Because one is presenting the other. It's like Tyler Perry. Like Tyler Perry's
Tyler
name
Perry presents. Love
is
Tyler.
on
Love Tyler. Big fan.
Everything.
Innovation Crush, Masters of Craft.
Ooh. Will you please record the introduction to that?
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining Innovation Crush, Masters of Craft.
Here's the problem I have with you.
Uh-oh. Here we go. Let's go.
You have you have too much of a storied career to identify with just one thing. And I wrote down some stuff.
Awesome.
Actually typed and I printed out paper.
Wow.
Because I'm antiquated.
I'm older than you, and that's why I have such a long and
But I was
varied
career. You worked with the Clinton administration. You're a founder, an investor. You produce films and television.
Yes.
You're a professor, a lawyer, a speaker. You spoke at Congress. And then also you have an activist bent to you.
Definitely all of the above. All of the above.
How is all that packaged in one person and why?
I don't take vacations. I don't play golf. I don't sleep very much. I like to work, man. I like my family and I like to work. So I get a lot of shit done.
What does work do for you? Like when you are in go mode and you're making things, what does that feel like for you?
If you are fortunate enough, as I think I have been, to align things you are interested in and passionate about with something that can pay your rent, you don't work, right? You're just doing stuff you love. Not that it never feels like work. It often feels like work. And not that every day, every week does not have a huge setback. You'll never be able to do this. Most of the things I've done, people said you won't be able to do that, including going to college. So, turns out you can do a lot if you just stay after it. So, I think I've done, like you said, I've worked in government service, politics, activism, technology, entertainment, media. Most of that professionally. The other stuff is all stuff outside of work.
And you're only 26.
And I'm only 26, yeah. I can drink now.
If you can in an abbreviated way, walk me through the path. And I'm always curious when people are multi hyphenates, what's the thread that ties them all together? And then we'll make our way into marginal media. And
that sounds awesome. Okay, so the quick version of a long story. I'm a first-generation American. I was born in India. I grew up in the Deep South, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. When we moved there were not many Indian families in the city.
Oh,
surprise!
You don't say.
there are now, super diverse and an amazing place now. My parents still live there, still go back there. Doing a lot of work right now for the community there, and especially the film and digital media and arts community there, which we can talk about at the end if we have time. My parents are also Marxists.
What is that? Okay.
I think
Karl
it's the
Marx,
first time that's been
Marxist
uttered
socialist. On any interview I've ever done.
So not that many Marxists there, publicly open about it. Very radical, pacifist, progressive people and amazing people, and one of the many reasons why I think I've been attracted to activism and progressive politics and government service. Wanted to be a filmmaker since the time I could remember. Always loved music, always loved film, wrote and directed little stupid short films, made music videos, skate videos. Went to college in New York City at Columbia to study film. By the time I finished college, realized that the world of film is the domain of rich white people. So, should have been obvious, but when people are like, hey, I raised $500,000 to make my first film, and you ask people how one goes about doing that, and the answer 10 times out of 10, when you push, is I asked my family for the money.
Yeah.
And I sort of said, hey, and this is ages ago. This is pre-internet, if you can imagine a time, pre-commercial internet. The Mosaic browser was up and running, Netscape was up and running, but active. You couldn't just hit somebody and say, hey, can I follow you around for a day? I love your music videos, right? And so I wrote letters to Spike Lee. I wrote letters to Ang Lee. Can I get a job?
All the Lees.
All the Lees, right?
Bruce.
Did not write to Bruce.
All right.
Just his Instagram account is amazing. Still,
his family does a great job with their brand.
The family is amazing. Yeah, the family is amazing. But anyway, I sort of said, look, zoom out, take a generational and global view. Right. My parents grew up in rural India with no water and no electricity. Right. Wow. And in one generation, here you are. Right. So I just thought, look, it's not the right time, right? Maybe it's not in the cards. Maybe I'll have the ability to come back to that. Maybe if I'm lucky, my kids will have the ability to come to it, but it's probably not in the cards, right? And so I thought, what else do I love? I love government service. Moved to DC, worked in the Clinton administration for the Attorney General, Janet Reno, who was amazing. That got me, that was the first time I'd met a lawyer and met many lawyers and super high octane lawyers at DOJ. Thought, okay, law is interesting. It's impactful. You don't need family wealth to enter it. Yeah. You don't need connections to enter it. And so I applied to a bunch of law schools, moved out to California, went to Stanford for law school, right when the commercial internet is really ripping, right? Mm-hmm. Google had started, Yahoo had started, all of the kind of V1 monster internet companies were like just getting started. So foolishly, I was paying to be in Silicon Valley and going to school rather than interning at any one of 100 startups in a walking mile radius of the Stanford campus, which might have changed a different trajectory for me. But I loved the school.
Here you are.
And yeah, then I finished school, moved to LA, began working as a technology transactions attorney, represented a bunch of movie studios, and that is how I kind of took a second crack at getting into the movie business from the business side of it. So that's how I ended up in LA, and that's how I started my career.
There's a thing that's kind of itching at me right now. Scratching at me? Itching. One or the other.
Itching.
Scratching sound. It's like, what is that? Like, you have to pay it if it's...
You got to feed the itch.
Right.
You don't have to feed a scratch.
I don't think you have to feed either one of them, technically. Doubt is the word that I actually wrote down because you talk about in this early phase where you're like, oh, that's probably not for me.
Right.
And, when we look at your storied career today, like there's a lot of things that in the end were for you. What is your view on doubt now?
Doubt. Wow. So doubt is a powerful thing. It's a terrible seed to plant in other people. And I think especially if you're a person of color or if you're from a disadvantaged, marginalized community, immigrant community, disability community, you're probably raised with doubt, right? So it's planted in you, whether you did it, whether your parents did it intentionally, unintentionally, the world you are raised in has probably planted that seed, right? So I have not really looked back at my life or career as having doubt be an element of it, but now that you mention it, it's of course has been, right? Not knowing whether you'd get into or go to college, not knowing whether you could pursue the career that you always thought you wanted to pursue, and then don't see a path, don't see anyone like you, have no mentors, no one kind of handing handing you a pass in, and sort of just finding your way. But I will say it's a hard one to shake, because even it's inside of a major studio, Warner Brothers, and then in my startup life since then, whether it's in ad tech or in digital media, most of the things I've done are, like I said, things that most people would say, you can't do that, or that's going to be really tough, or that's stupid, you're an idiot, right? And so
that's one I usually get.
Exactly, right? And so when you get feedback like that, it's hard not to have doubt triggered, right? Like, oh, maybe I was right to have that self-doubt. But I think if you have an entrepreneurial instinct, and entrepreneurship is kind of a loaded and slightly douchey word these days. If you like to build things or make things, or don't like huge corporate environments with bureaucracy, and just like that gets you out of bed in the morning, which there are many people around the world who have that instinct, whether they would call themselves entrepreneurs or not. Doubt may also drive you and kind of give you a little bit of energy, which for me it definitely does. Yeah. I like being the underdog, maybe because I've had to be, but I also find it gives me energy to do things that people say you can't.
Imposter syndrome is like a constant little buzz.
Right.
And it also is the thing that makes me do excellent work, or at least attempt to.
Right. You do excellent work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think any sort of fault, I don't know if that's the right word, can become a superpower, to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think when you have had to push yourself harder and more is expected of you, and you have to work 3 times harder, 3 times faster, 3 times better, it does push you. Not that that's a good reason, because ultimately that reason is born
Therapy is also
out of inequity.
Probably a thing that people should dive into.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, fast forward, you've kind of, you go from the Warner Brothers through your tech ventures, through, a stint at All Def Digital.
Yep.
And Machinima, we shared some time at in the gaming space. RIP. The pour out a little.
I don't want to get the Verizon
electrical fire.
R.I.P. Masters of Craft.
Exactly. Good night, Verizon.
Good night.
We burned down Verizon.
We burned down.
Remember that time?
Remember that time?
No, now I forgot my train of thought. So now you've actually turned this into an organization that does the very thing that you solves for the very thing we've been talking about.
Yep.
Walk us through Marginal Media.
So Marginal is my third startup. You mentioned Machinima, where we were lucky enough to meet and work at, which was in the video gaming space. Interestingly enough, even at that time, which you remember, but now probably many people don't remember, video gaming was considered fringe culture. When we were building Machinima early, traditional entertainment people were sort of that seems stupid. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Venture capitalists were wait, what games do you make? We don't make any games. So you make videos about kids playing video games
and other people's IP. How's that even monetizable?
So it all seemed weird, fringe, and super niche, and we'd have to remind the venture capital community and the entertainment community that the games business is 3 times bigger than the movie business, right? So these things that seem marginal actually have massive, outsized cultural and commercial value. And Machinima was a great example of that. Twitch obviously, came later and became even bigger. And now we have The Last of Us, and suddenly everyone's like, "Oh my God, video gaming!
Video games are cool,
right?" And so that's one example. All Def was another strand in a similar theme, which is hip hop seemed to traditional entertainment people and to the venture community niche. It seemed like something that was cool but niche, and you have to remind people it's the largest category of streaming on all of Spotify. In nearly every territory of the world. It's by definition not niche anymore. Just by numbers, right? And so it's interesting when you love subculture and understand that it drives all culture, and culture sits above policy, above law, above everything else, right? So Marginal really kind of comes out of that long-running thesis that minority communities, marginalized communities, are the creators, consumers of culture that drive global commerce and culture, right?
Yeah.
And so name comes from a Toni Morrison quote, which is, "I'll hang in the margin and let the center look for me." Everything we do centers otherness and aims to normalize otherness through commercial storytelling. We make feature films. We've made 8 movies in just over 3 years. Our next 2 premiere at Tribeca. Of 8 films in competition, 2 will be ours. All amazing indie films. All by first, second-time filmmakers, all filmmakers of color and or queer, immigrants. So that theme runs through all of it. Commercial, Latinx horror, a South Asian comedy. One of the films we have at Tribeca stars Tierra Whack, the Interscope recording artist.
Cypher.
So,
That's the one I'm excited about.
Exactly.
I'm excited about all of it, but like that
no,
one is like,
we're very excited
yeah.
about that one. And it's been 4 years in the making. Just from when Tierra dropped that first little visual album, I was like, oh my God, this
bananas.
is bananas.
Yeah.
Bananas, right? We've sold our first TV show, which is set up at Amazon. Our first animated series is set up at Hulu. We do a good bit of work in audio, scripted fiction, and kind of podcasting. And so, doing a lot of work across these media and formats. We have several international projects, local language projects in India, in South Korea. So we see the changes that technology, streaming, of course, 5G accelerates streaming, right? Global penetration of these devices, just changing fundamentally the next 100 years of entertainment and storytelling, which will be less centered on the traditional US-driven studio theatrical business.
Yeah.
That won't go away, and I love that business, and I'm a film nerd. I like small movies and huge movies alike. But just the consumer behavior and the business around creating and distributing commercial storytelling will look very different over the next 100 years. So we're a studio that is sort of centered on, if we started a new studio, the next Warner Brothers, the next Disney in 2025 from scratch, what would that look like? And it would be diverse in its DNA. That wouldn't be a mission statement. That would just be reflective of the global population, which is 80% not white. And it would be super technologically enabled and savvy. So we have under the hood a huge data sciences operation. We're doing a lot of work in generative AI that we don't talk about because it scares people.
Let's talk about it. It also kind of fits within a theme that's been running in my head in the last couple minutes, which is this perception versus reality, right? Like you talk about hip hop or whatever other community that feels marginalized, but is actually like a lot more gigantic than, for some reason, is understood.
Right.
Do you know why? Do you know why the perception doesn't match the actual reality of numbers? I
think I told you I was raised by Marxists. The answer, colonialism. so
let's move on. No,
white power is a motherfucker, right? So look, these industries are dominated, the business of the industries, and especially storytelling industries, right? The games business is no exception, right? These are very white-dominated industries, right? The historical way these industries run are very insular, club-like, and to the extent they use data, the data that they use is not that different from the venture capital community either, right? Why are black engineers so underrepresented in the Valley?
Yeah.
So it's like, wait, why is that, right? There's, again, no shortage of talent out there, but access, opportunity, people willing to mentor and bring in is a different thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's easy when you have a sort of like engine that is controlled, in Hollywood at least, by a fairly small group of people, intermediaries, gatekeepers, ultimate decision makers, predominantly used to a traditional order and a traditional way of doing things. And I saw something that I think Jerry Bruckheimer put out when Top Gun Maverick was coming out, that he'd asked like his team to give him like, who are the 15 biggest movie stars? And he was surprised that it's like the same 15 movie stars, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're in that insular world, it's not that hard to understand, wait, why is it that they think, they're surprised by a breakout black movie or Asian American movie? Why were people so surprised that Crazy Rich Asians was a giant hit? It's over 5 years ago now, right? It's like a super sexy, rich cast, a great movie, hilarious.
Yeah, it's got all the things.
It's got all the things that would make a commercial hit,
reminds
right?
me of something else I heard you say. You talked about there was an American interviewer who interviewed the star of Squid Game. And he was like, "How does it feel to, finally break into stardom?" He's like, "No, he's already been like." And again, it goes into that perception versus reality.
That's right. He's like, where I'm from, I'm considered a giant star already. Like, so it's like stardom isn't new. We have these projects. We have several projects in India, and I'm fortunate enough to know some of the world's biggest talent, which is based in India, writers, actors, actresses, and when they come here, it's like, oh, right.
Great. Crickets.
Hard to get a meeting, hard to get people to pay attention. And this is, again, this perception that, oh, that's cool. You're a star in a niche territory. And now people are starting, in the case of India in particular, it's the largest democracy in the world. It's 1.4 billion people. Yeah. That's America plus a billion people.
Right. Well, I think there's a general Americanization of most things. It just reminds me of this other comedian named Gil. He's French, but he's like, I'm like the Jerry Seinfeld of France. And there's a skit before he does a special. It's like he's opening for Jerry Seinfeld, and Jerry's like, who? You're the Jerry Seinfeld? Like he just had no idea that this dude was big. And now he has a show actually on Netflix where it's like a faux reality version of him trying to make it now in America, and nobody knows. Oh,
I know what you're talking about.
It's,
yeah.
But it's interesting. I love this perspective you have on sort of the global, mass potential of certain genres and and cultures when it comes to entertainment and like the marriage of entertainment and technology.
Right.
What do you think, from your bird's eye view, we have yet to learn or get right here? And try to keep it to a short list.
Sorry, I'm a mic hog at karaoke. You're like, try to keep it short. We're running out of time.
I just meant there's probably
we just started and we're almost out of time.
Things. So I was like, what are the top three for you?
For entertainment and technology, I think with entertainment, this has to change. It will change just because demographics is destiny, right? So 80% of the world's premium entertainment is made by Hollywood. 80% of the world is non-white. Now, in an era of global streaming, where the market is the global market and America is essentially tapped out, right? Yeah. The biggest sources of growth are Asia, Africa, LATAM, right? Non-white territories, right? So that change will have to happen. It's, hopefully it happens in my lifetime. It will happen in our kids' lifetime, right? It has to. That's just demographics and the global consumer base, right? So that is, I think, inspiring and optimistic if you are someone that's always felt like you're on the outside of this industry, to understand that the industry is you thought you were in the margins, it's gonna come to you, right? So that's my take on how the impact of streaming on a global content marketplace will happen. No one would have thought that a Korean show like Squid Game would be the biggest TV show in the world. No one would have thought a black French criminal named Lupin would become a global star. None of those shows would have been greenlit by the traditional American TV process, right? On the technology side, streaming, I think, is just the tip of the spear because it helps people understand, content will be digitally distributed, and that makes it accessible on a phone, on a laptop, and to the global population rather than through terrestrial cable or through theaters, right?
Well, I think also with like this amount of access, both on just the ability to access content and the ability to make it, right? There's all sorts of waves happening, coming, going, crashing, what's happening streaming, the at the time of this taping, we're we're in the middle of a writer's strike, and that's like, is that the last time we had a big one, it gave rise to reality television. It's just there's a lot of like unsure footing. You also got into a business that has a very long sales and development cycle. Even though here you mentioned 4 years you've been working on this, right? Where if you're a traditional entrepreneur, it's like you're gonna give it 18 months and try to do your raise. Why did you decide to get into this business, right, where it's so fractured?
It's hard. I decided to get into this business partly because it's the only thing I ever wanted to do. And at the time I was, for late mid 40s. I was like, hey, I got to take a run at this, and if it fails, it fails, but I got to take a third run. And if it's a third organ rejection from the entertainment industry, then so be it. And then I'll go get another job, or I'll go start something in tech again. That's the emotional reason. And then as I started to do the research around it, I started to feel like, holy shit, this is actually a giant commercial opportunity, right? Partly because of that demographic analysis, and partly because of the impact of technology, right? And so thinking about how data sciences in particular, how low the bar was in entertainment for applying technology, right? So streaming just gave me the conviction that more and more entrants to this market will understand and appreciate how technology can dislocate traditional industries and how it can enhance other industries, right? So I'm not a kill Hollywood, technology will kill Hollywood. I do think Hollywood will change and adapt, as it always has, to technological changes, and that is an opportunity, right? And so data science is an example. We acquired a company last year called Fresno, which is a data sciences startup. And that gives us the ability, when we look at material, to test and validate audience sizes, demographic interests globally around a piece of material. That could be a screenplay, that could be a book, that could be a newspaper article. And it's not the definitive determinant of whether we move on a project. It's a piece of information that is helpful to us in deciding, right? So when we look at something, we kind of go through our normal process. Then we've created a slightly different proprietary process to do what in Hollywood you call script coverage, partly to take systemic bias out of that process, and partly to do it in a different way because we think there's an opportunity to do that in a better and slightly more data-driven way. And then we validate, is there audience around this, right? Rather than one guy reads a script, it's usually a guy, and his gut says, I think this is hot. And then 2 years, 3 years, 4 years later, you make a movie, it's $1 million, it's $10 million, it's $20 million, it's a studio movie, it's $100 million. And then you start doing focus groups and testing. Which always seems
so
like
this one guy's
so now you're doing the focus groups and you need to go do reshoots, you need to re-edit the movie. Hey, the focus groups are coming back. It's like, well, what analysis went into developing and greenlighting the movie before?
$65 million. Dude, Adam Driver.
Right. I thought that movie looked pretty good. I love Adam Driver.
Oh, me too.
Yeah,
me too.
Adam Driver, dinosaurs.
What else? What more do you need? Just a lightsaber. Like that would be cool. So you mentioned Fresno. You also talked about like our cultural fear of artificial intelligence.
Yes.
But I feel like this has also been around for a long time, right? Yep. Oh, AI can do this. Oh no, our jobs are going to be gone. It's becoming a lot more prevalent in culture, or at least discussed.
Yep.
I'm going to ask you to put your lawyer hat on for a second.
Okay.
And talk about ownership. With like music that's being created, or scripts that are being written, or art that's being created, like all these things. It's like who owns what, and like what's your crystal ball tell you on like how that will play out?
Super complicated, and I don't know that anyone knows. I mean, right now, and for disclosure, I haven't practiced law in like 15 years, so what do I know?
When I met you were a lawyer, so
but I'm just, the nerd in me is super fascinated about this, because that was my area of focus, is intellectual property.
Oh, awesome.
And so it's like it will be Wild West, right? So I believe writers currently on strike are absolutely correct to be like, I wouldn't say fearful, but concerned, and to be planting a flag that things should not be originated by AI for the moment, right? That may change, and their opinion may change on it as people get more and more comfortable with different usages of different applications of the technology, right? Whether they're tools to enhance creativity or displace creativity are two different strands that the tech can go in, right? So I think it will be similar to, there was a lot of confusion. I'm trying to think of good analogies. Andy Warhol does the Campbell soup, and then 100 Campbell soups, and like sort of commercial production of call it pop art, right? Which called into question a lot of issues around like, hey, can he do that? That's our brand, that's our logo, right? And we have a system that vets and understands and goes through fair use and art and what you can do and can't do with other people's copyright and their protected copyright and IP. And in the case of art and free speech, we've generally erred to the side of free speech, right? I think that's a good thing, and I think there should be more places where IP can enter what this guy Larry Lessig calls the Creative Commons, right? And so a shared pool of IP that people can draw from freely. Major media companies generally don't like that because they want to protect their IP as long as humanly possible. They extend the Copyright Act on their protected IP. Understandable. They're protecting things they have invested hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in.
There was a whole big story about Disney with that, how they're like one of the big rule benders and like change makers when it comes to like the extension of copyrights.
That's right. That's right.
Public domain and all that.
That's right. So in general, owners of IP and media companies want to own that IP as long as possible and to protect it, right? Understandable. That's their commercial mandate. And they've invested in generally hundreds of millions of dollars in building up those IPs. So they want to protect them and monetize them as long as humanly possible, right? But we also have this thing called the public domain for a reason. And this concept of something called the Creative Commons, which is at some point, creativity needs to be nourished. And if everything is protected, nothing new can be created, right? And so in a world of like, there's no new stories, it gets harder and harder and harder for creativity to flourish, right? So I think for the usages of AI as a tool to help writers, to help visual artists, it will be a lot like what we saw with pop art. It may be like what we saw with sampling and hip hop. I think people were like, this blows my mind. These guys are ripping off other people's music. And now I think people generally agree, oh, they're creating something wholly different, leveraging a lot of other material and assembling it in a very fundamentally different way, right? And that's art, and that's art from the margins that becomes its own commercial art, and it can't exist without drawing from other things, right? So, and that's not new to hip hop. That like classical music has quoted other and referenced other classical music. Like, so that's not a new thing. But in a technology environment, we can absolutely like track it and pin it down, so it becomes more complicated.
Which is, I don't know. I have two thoughts. One, I need to circle back on you being a jazz DJ. But before that, a friend of mine wrote a book called The Pirate's Dilemma, and he talked about these histories of quote unquote piracy. And one of my favorite anecdotes from that book is the introduction of the phonograph and vinyl.
Yeah, right.
And like all these bands were touring, and that's how they were making their money from venue to venue, going on multi-city tours. And then they thought that, well, if I can just play it in my venue, oh no, I'm out of a job, out of money, out of work, et cetera, et cetera. But what did it do? It actually like popularized them more than they could ever have been popularized. So I think, if we take the right perspectives on some of these things, they can be very much assistive to the industry and or your career or whatever it might be, and not taking it from like, oh no, the robot wars are about to happen.
Right. Totally agree. And I think done right.
I mean, they are about to happen though. Just and they're starting at the writer's strike.
They're happening, and they're going to start here. Yeah. This is the futuristic lab where it all starts.
Exactly.
Right? No, but technology for the ability to democratize access to very hard to enter industries, technology is pretty good at that, right? The turntable made, entering into music, turning the turntable into a musical instrument, right. Is technology creating this like democratizing effect, right?
Yes.
And so if you're an aspiring writer, but you have great stories, but you haven't had the ability to go to a film school or to learn Final Draft, the format of a screenplay, right, is its own thing. And if you submit a screenplay in the town and formatting is all fucked up, people will assume you don't know what you're doing and you're not a good writer.
Literally what happened to me. Like, so when I was in
all
college
fucked
and I
up.
loved writing sketch comedy,
Right.
and I was sending my scripts around to because I bought a book where you could like get all these studio executives. One guy out of probably like 75 hit me up and he was like, "I love your stuff. It's written terribly, like format wise." And like I had no idea because I was writing like a play you would get out, in your high school,
Right. Exactly.
But it's also somebody taking the time to look past the presentation.
That's right.
Which is also hard, especially now because we are constantly inundated with just the new things. There's so much information to filter through.
That's right. So these are all aspects of most industries, but especially the entertainment industry, where there is systemic bias, and it's not necessarily because people are racist. Many are. Many aren't. Many are super well-intentioned, but it's a high like the amount of scripts that you get, the amount of inbound inquiries. It's just huge. So it's for humans to go through them, and not put aside any like biases is not possible, right?
Yeah.
And so there are some proxies that people use to judge, is this material worth my time or not, right? And so if something comes to them from one of the major agencies, okay, that has the like patina of a major agency on it. And so I'm going to prioritize it, right? If it comes from an email and the formatting is all messed up, the instinct is it's amateur, it's probably not that good, right? And so very few people can take the time to say, let me look past that. Let me read this guy's sketch comedy. This guy's hilarious, even though the formatting is all fucked up.
By the way, I apologize. In my confirmation email to you, I wrote, wear whatever you like, and it was WHERE.
I noticed. Just kidding. I did not notice. Yeah.
So why were you a jazz DJ?
Good question. I did not forget about that, but that's funny that you mentioned that. People don't bring that up. That was my first job. I was a jazz DJ. Why? Because I love jazz music and grew up.
Like, were you doing venues or were you on like a radio station?
No, not like a DJ, like a radio station DJ.
Okay. Yeah. Let's move on.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Like I hosted a jazz show in Baton Rouge.
Did you?
Yeah.
We have so much
WBRH 90.3 FM
to do for you.
I had a radio name, and I was told I could not. I was told I needed to use an American name.
Nice. Do you know what Nelson Mandela's real name is?
No.
Kolihla. True story. I started reading the book to my son last night about Nelson Mandela.
I only know
was like, his name is what? His name became Nelson when he went to school. Because it was British rule in South. Anyway, so speaking of British rule, all deaf digital.
Speaking of colonialism,
I'm really terrible at segues. What did you learn working with a Russell Simmons? Like, we were talking about hip hop, and somebody who definitely went against the grain and created a lot of culture that we see and experience today. Like, what did you learn in the 2-3 years you were?
Help Russell start that, and it we didn't know each other. We got introduced through mutual friends at Google, actually, I think. I grew up, admiring and loving Def Jam in particular, and had a ton of Def Jam records on, that purple label. You saw that thing and you knew it was going to be hot. And so Def Jam in particular, Def Comedy Jam, Def Poetry Jam, all, Fat Farm, the blueprint that was created for hip hop, urban culture, call it, and the many recording artists, fashion designers, comedians, stand-up comics, sketch comics that came out of that world, I think is still maybe the most powerful cultural movement in the country, and by extension the world, maybe even to this day, right? That's still all of the biggest touring comics, that's still Jay-Z and who, like all of that. So I was just like, wow. And I was obsessed by that world, and it had a huge impact on me personally growing up. And one of the many reasons I wanted to move to New York, I'd never been in New York City. That's why I wanted to move to New York City. So it was an amazing ride. It was a lot of ups and downs. It was a challenging market. We learned a lot of things the hard way. We did a lot of stuff that people said you can't really do. Started a bunch of formats on digital that I think now people would say, oh, that's a TV show, right? But we made them in our little studio downtown with a small group of super talented, super diverse young kids. But so it was, for a moment, it was, the thesis was sort of like hip hop's answer to Vice, or if Complex were started as a video first publication, rather than something coming out of a digital print magazine publishing culture. And so very quickly, we understood the technology, platform dynamics on YouTube in particular. And this is where I think traditional entertainment people will have to adapt, right? Is understanding the platforms that you're distributed on and the way algorithms work, the way search works, the way customer acquisition works. All of that stuff is stuff that traditional entertainment people haven't really had to worry about. Like, you make a great film, that's all you can do. And then the studio markets it. It's released in you don't really need to know the distribution technology. You don't need to know how the Netflix algorithm, now you do, right? And so early, we learned very quickly, and we knew this from our days at Machinima, this is how YouTube works. And YouTube is the second biggest search engine in the world behind only Google. And so we figured out how to create formats that natively worked very, very well in video and social video environments, right? And so quickly that became, in video at least, bigger than Vice, bigger than Complex, bigger than all of those guys in video. In print or page views, nothing. We didn't have a website, right? Yeah. And so it was a wild ride and a great run while it lasted.
I told you we were going to talk about cancel culture a little bit. I have an unpopular opinion on separating the art from the artist.
Oh, okay.
Okay. What in your opinion? Because I look at like Ezra Miller, Jonathan Majors, everybody who's kind of like, they've given us great talent, but they've also been assholes to some sliding scale of severity.
Yep.
What's your take, especially just given the fact that you're working with a lot of creators and every day you don't know what somebody's doing behind closed doors or what they tweeted 6 years ago.
Yep.
Like, how are you handling cancel culture?
It's a great question. It's a hard one to answer, partly because of the environment we're in, right? I do find it... we need some nuance in the conversation. I personally am a second chances kind of guy. Like, we should have a world in which people are given grace and compassion and second chances. There's some things that are unforgivable, right? So some of this is the nuance. I don't remember exactly the Ezra Miller story, but he broke into a house or something.
It was like he was on a run for a second. It's like five or six things back to back.
There's a spectrum of was it a petty crime, especially criminal acts, what we describe as criminal acts, disproportionately impact people of color, right? And so they're usually the ones that are like, oh yeah, I had this drug offense, or I had this thing, or I had that thing. And so our whole communities are taken out of the game because of indiscretion as a teenager, as a young person. Like, that's not good for communities of color or marginalized communities, right? We're disproportionately impacted by those kinds of prosecutions and those kinds of criminal laws, right? Now, violence, right? Misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, some of these things we need to just get out of the system, right? You can go do other things, but when we start thinking about the impact of who gets to tell stories, right? Who gets to create commercial art that impacts the world, I do think we need to pay some attention to, wait, in every other industry this has happened too, right? Are you the right person to run that business, right? Do you embody the values of the business do you embody the values of your business, right? So when a major brand says, we stand for this, and then it's like, oh, right, but you employ a bunch of child labor there, like, so it's not, if it's incongruous, then you should be accountable for that, right? So I don't think of it, I usually look at these things through like an accountability lens or a consequences culture, right? Not so much cancel, right? It's less about like canceled out, never work again. But did you say that?
Yeah. Well, like, but also it's like it's you know, sometimes up to the audiences, right? It's up to the people who are like.
That's right. So
regardless if you have an ethics clause in your contract and like you should be able to come back, like some people just don't want you.
That's right. So do you want to support this person's new soap product, or do you want to support this person's new movie? And at some point, you know too much about their personal lives. Like, yeah,
I'm
people
waiting for
have
the Harvey Weinstein shampoo. Like that's
the Harvey Weinstein shampoo selling hot off the right. But so, you know, it's not a great answer, but I do think sometimes people should be accountable for what they say, the way they behave, and what they think. Like, if you really think that, Tucker Carlson, right, then I don't want to have anything to do with you. I don't want people to support you. You have many of other platforms. A lot of the people that have been canceled, so-called canceled, I'm like, what are you talking about? They still have massive platforms. Yeah. They're still doing just fine. Where's the cancellation, right? Tucker Carlson's going to be good. Did he get canceled? I don't think so. Still has a giant megaphone. We'll probably get some giant Spotify deal. You know, like he's the next Joe Rogan. Boom. Like, he's good. So it's just like, wait, who's... So suddenly it's like, oh, right. So when a person of color commits an indiscretion, they're canceled. We don't need to ever work with you again. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So I look at it a little differently. But I'm unabashedly woke around this stuff. Ooh. I'm okay with it. Yeah. Like, we need that pendulum to swing the other way. Most of the people I find who are so concerned about it and tell me in private, like, I just feel like I can't say anything. It's like, well, welcome to our whole lives. I've always been worried about what I say in mixed company. You've always had to self-censor yourself. It's a lifetime of fear of cancel culture.
Balances in your head before you
that the law firm partner might not think you're a team player if you just that's the world. If you're a person of color, that's your life has been a life of fear of cancel culture. So it's like you can deal with it for a couple of years. It's cool.
Yeah. Caleb.
Yeah.
Hey. You remember meeting Caleb?
We met Caleb. Oh, Caleb tripped on the stairs as we walked in.
You did trip up the stairs.
Yeah. And he almost tripped me.
And he broke his back. Yeah. Come here. Hi, I like your beard.
Oh, thank you.
You saw Beef, right?
I like the Beef.
Oh, Beef was incredible.
Beef is incredible.
Because you do a lot of celebrating, and I have a compounded point of conversation. What was your take on Beef?
It was absolutely absurdly good. I mean, it was some of the best writing I've seen recently, and it was so incredibly relatable in a new way that I think I've never seen in television, but at the same time incredibly unique because it came from the Asian American culture, like that side of things. Dude, I had hesitated watching it because I just didn't want to binge on anything right now. I just didn't have the time.
Yep.
And I sprained my back, and I was laying out for like 2 weeks. So what did I do? Is the first thing I turned it on, and I couldn't stop. It was, just the performances down to the writing, to the dialogue, and how real and raw it was, but then how fast it spiraled out of control and immediately became unrelatable after a certain point because I was like, it's basically, I would say it's like somebody letting all their, what do you call those thoughts that you don't want to come out? I can't, intrusive thoughts. It's like, what if you let them actually occur?
Yep.
And that's basically what that whole show is.
Yep.
It's so good. Yeah.
Occur.
No, because sorry, I couldn't help myself. Because I was like, you got to watch the show. The reason I bring it up because you do a lot of celebrating of the community, especially when it comes to your involvement in CAPE. And my take on Beef was like, it could have been anybody. Like as far like
Yep.
road rage and dealing with like the haves and the have-nots
Yep.
and anger and divorce
Yep.
and like all the themes were so universal, and you hardly felt like it was beating you over the head
Yep. Yep.
as an Asian piece of content.
Yep.
Am I right, my white brother?
100%. Yes.
It's,
Yeah.
you know, and I feel like that is indicative of a tide of change.
Yep.
You know,
Yep. 1000%.
But you tell me your take on it.
No, I love the show. I think it's master work, and I think you hit it. It's a universally accessible show. It's obviously very culturally specific in a lot of ways, so it's authentic. But I think people are starting to get that shows that are made by or center people of color, the audience for those shows is not just people of color, right? It should be obvious. It seems, but it's a like Hollywood logic fallacy, right? It's hip hop is an example, right? It's the most popular music in the world because everybody likes it, right? It's not like, oh, these black creators make this music and other black people like it. It's white kids in Beverly Hills like it, kids in Kansas City like it, kids in Baton Rouge, Louisiana like it, everybody likes it, kids in India like it, right? It's universally accessible, right? And so the challenge in narrative filmed entertainment is and remains, oh, it's a movie with a South Asian cast. Oh, it's for the South Asian community. No, it's just a comedy. Right. Anyone with a sense of humor can get it, right? And so the more we see shows like Beef, where we at Marginal, we tell our creative partners and our business partners, we like stories where identity is a prism, but it's not the plot. Right. I think Beef nails that. It's very identity authentic, right? It's not generic, could be anybody, right? But at some points, you're like, yeah, that's me, right? Because everybody's tried to pull out of a parking spot and someone's doing something mildly fucked up, and you just feel like, you know what, man? Not today.
That's actually how you hurt his back.
Oh, really?
No.
Road rage? You look like an angry... That was very aggressive. I saw that trip down the stairs. It was like you had some anger to get
on
out.
film. On film. Who does that? Except for Donald Glover.
Gets it all?
Shot Swarm on film. I have 3 points I want to hit with the little bit of time we have left. First of all, I think me being a black person sitting in the seat, it's interesting. You talk about like, oh, it features these people, so it must be for them. As we were going through like the curation list and like, I had this thing where I was like, oh, if I book too many black people, they're going to think it's a black show. Right. Which is the flip side of, I think, of being a marginalized person. Like, you need to present something that, if I'm like this type of humor, if it's like, I'm calling it Hangover as a bad example. I just wanted to be a Hangover movie. I don't need it to be a black or an Asian or LGBTQ, like whatever it is. I just want it to be what it is. Right. Also, like, so there's this really weird tug of war we have as creators, and like being authentic, but also not being placed into a box. Right. I don't need you to comment on that. Nope. You just made me think about it.
It's exactly right. And again, one of the many additional burdens that we have to think about, right? Because we know the world we operate in, right? And so if all your guests on the show were black, were people of color, is it seen as, oh, it's a minority show? Yeah. It's like, what does that mean?
When are you going to become black?
Me?
Yeah.
Let's go.
The show's called Masters.
See, now you're going to get me canceled.
I know. No, don't worry. That's why I interrupted you, because I don't need Sanjay.
Don't answer that.
Yeah. The show's called Masters of Craft, as you masterfully did the voiceover for.
Masterfully crafted by Chris Denson.
What is something that you're having trouble mastering?
Ooh. I don't know that I've mastered anything. I feel a little bit more like jack of all trades, master of none. The thing I'm having the most trouble mastering is quiet, like just being still. I meditated for a very long time. I fell off during COVID when probably should have started, but instead I started drinking more and meditating less. And I'm having a very hard time getting back to it. I'd never achieved mastery, would never presume to be able to achieve mastery, but between life, kids, work, nonprofits, just a busy kind of schedule, and being able to get like still quiet for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, not looking at the phone, not thinking about like, oh, I forgot to send those 10 emails or this or that, like is a real challenge. So I'm working on that.
The game is real.
The game is real.
That's real talk. Do you have any final words?
Caleb.
I would say, take this. I don't know. I mean, I just felt like I wanted to take the microphone for a second, but I also will say one thing that's helped me with that too is a little bit of that, you know. That's because that's my replacement. I don't drink.
Okay.
But I can meditate a lot more now because I'm thinking all the time because, you know, so it changes.
Any particular strain, brand?
I'm very, I mean, no particular brands, but like I'm
Prefer to
more of a
smoke or
sativa
edible?
kind of guy
Okay,
because you
yeah.
can actually function on sativa.
Right.
I crash
Right.
anything else. So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
that's, I mean, but it honestly, it just, for me as somebody, and I have incredibly ADHD, like it's to a
Helps.
degree that is absurdly been criminally, like it crippled me most of my life.
Right.
But
Right.
it's been able
Right.
to like, I don't know, I think it just empowers me to kind of embrace a little bit of what that ADHD does in me.
Yep.
But it turns it into almost more of a superpower for me on the days that I need it.
I love it.
To be a superpower.
And
Other days
you
it's,
and your mode of delivery, preferred mode of delivery, smoking, vape, edible,
smoking. I try to, yeah, exactly. I like to favor on
old
the,
school. I'm keeping it. I'm keeping it.
Just, yeah,
I like it.
injectables. I favor the health side of it. So,
Yes, I do have an injectable cannabis.
Sorry.
yeah. Yeah, honestly, for me, I'm trying to focus on my health. So if I can avoid vape, I completely avoid vape.
Okay.
Do I always? No, but I would like to. You know,
Are you now? No.
For the most part, I do. But herb is kind of where grass is where I
Love it.
go if
Love
I
it.
can. But edibles too, I think.
Love it.
There
Purist.
you go.
Grass.
Are you high now?
I love how you called it grass. It's like,
Or. No, I'm just-
what are you?
or no.
What are you struggling to master? You've mastered many things. You got a lot of accomplishments
I feel like
and
you. Like,
achievements under your
I
belt.
I
You
feel like
know.
I feel like I've attempted a lot of things,
Yeah.
and I feel like I hit like a stopping point, and then I'm like, I find a way to try to pivot around it. So I never feel fully mastered at most things, and I've had like a lot of different iterations of life and career. I'm trying to do better with money right now, and I've also the pandemic actually sent me into a space of a little bit more mindfulness and like my mornings, even this morning, like knowing that we have like a full production day, was like got up 30 minutes early, did my morning meditation, a little bit of body work, and I was off to the races. So not the racists, the races.
And then you went off to the racists.
so they're gonna pick me up pretty soon.
It's like, all right, great. Well,
They're all here.
into the.
But Sanjay,
Where
thank
did you bring me?
Thank you for joining us.
Oh no, am I safe here?
Yeah,
Is this-
exactly.
Have you seen the movie The
Do you
Green
have any
Room?
final last words? I don't know how
Awesome
to open
movie.
the show with
Awesome
you,
movie.
and I don't know how to close the show with you.
And we're out.
But I do appreciate you being here and sharing today.
Appreciate you, my guy.
Thank you.
Oh,
You were here
and
too.
we're out. Thank you, Caleb.